hours north of Phoenix, the small town of Snowflake lies at the edge of Arizona's White Mountain region, a popular destination for camping, fishing, hiking, and skiing. This high-altitude area enjoys plenty of sunshine year-round. But you don't want to be stranded on these mountains on a cold, dark night. Just ask Travis Walton. Born and raised in Snowflake, he's still haunted by his intimate encounter with alien beings more than 30 years ago.
For years after the incident, it occupied my every thought all the time. It's something I just couldn't shake out of my mind.
At the time, Travis was 22 and working on a logging crew in the Sitgreaves National Forest, just outside of town. On November 5th, 1975, the team of 7 men piled into a pickup truck after a long day's work and headed home just after dusk.
We're coming down this road, and we saw some glimmers of light coming through the trees off to the side, up ahead. We were thinking, well, maybe a forest fire, or maybe an airplane had crashed and was hanging up there in the trees or something, because it was just something really very strange.
As the men got closer to the source of the light, they all fell silent.
We looked off to the right side, and we saw this object. This was less than 100 feet away, this glowing metallic object hovering there, outlined against the sky. Just the most incredible thing we'd seen. Somebody yelled out, "It's a spaceship." I mean, it was just incredible. And I yelled, "Stop the truck."
To the horror of the other men, Walton got out of the vehicle.
And they started yelling at me to stop and get back in the truck. But at that point, you know, the way I was back then, you young guys, I was kind of showing off for the crew.
He walked slowly towards the mysterious craft until he was almost underneath it.
I was just standing there looking up at this thing, and I could feel this vibration coming from it, the sound. It's just a strange mixture of high-frequency tones and this low rumble that you could feel more than hear, actually.
It was like reflecting light at the same time it was giving off light.
Suddenly, it rose up a little bit, and the sound kind of got louder, and it started making this sort of rocking motion. And those guys just, "Get out of here, let's go, let's go." So I just decided I was going to make a dash for it, and I raised up and turned to go, and wham! I just felt this shock hit me, and it's kind of like an electrical shock. It's just this numbing sort of thing, and I was just unconscious. But the guy said that a blast of energy come out of the bottom of this thing, and it just lit up the whole area, just almost blinding. And they said it just picked me up and threw me back through the air. And they said my body went so far and landed so limp, they just thought it killed me.
In a frenzy of fear, the crew took off, leaving Travis behind.
A lot of people criticize these guys, you know, how come they didn't stop and save their friend? But, you know, we had no guns, and you know, what are these guys going to do? You know, all they could do is maybe, you know, become victims themselves. So, you know, I really don't find fault with the fact that they took off. They just did what I probably would have done, you know.
Though they knew they'd sound crazy, the loggers called the town sheriff and explained what had happened.
The sheriff interviewed the men, and he was very struck by the fact that the men were so shook up. You know, their faces were white, they were shaking. One of the guys was still crying, and so they were convinced that something very serious had happened.
3 of the loggers came back to the forest with the sheriff and other law enforcement officers later that same night. But no trace of Walton could be found. The next day, his disappearance launched a worldwide story and a massive hunt.
There was over 50 men combing this area, 4-wheel drives, men on horseback. There were airplanes and helicopters crisscrossing the area. They even brought in tracking dogs.
But after 4 days of fruitless searching, it became clear that no one knew where on Earth, or elsewhere, Travis Walton was. Neither did Walton.
When I came to, I was lying on my back on a hard surface, and I could see a light above me. I was thinking I was in a hospital.
But Walton soon realized these doctors weren't human.
When I finally got where my eyes could focus, I saw this creature standing over me. They were small, just a little over 4 feet tall. They had a mouth and a human arrangement of features, and their features were small except for the eyes, and the eyes were huge.
Another group of aliens then held Walton down and placed a mask over his face.
That was the last thing I remember. woke up lying face down on the cold pavement here in the dark, and I could see a light coming from above. I looked up to see this craft hovering there. You know, it was just there for a second when I looked, and it shot straight up and was gone from sight almost instantly.
Walton found himself near the town of Heber, 30 miles from where he had been abducted. He stumbled into the deserted town and called his family from a payphone. When they arrived, Walton learned just how long he had been gone.
I thought that this was the same night. They said, hey, feel your face. And I reached up and I had this, you know, 5-day growth of beard. And I looked at the date on my watch, which was days beyond what it was supposed to be. And you know, that was just quite a shock to me.
An international media circus soon descended on Snowflake, and it didn't take long before Walton's credibility was put on the line.
Then came all these, you know, attacks, you know, claiming that I was hallucinating on drugs, that I'd had a transitory psychosis, all that sort of thing. It was just made it really doubly hard to endure.
The furor eventually died down and life went back to normal for the residents of Snowflake. But not for Travis Walton. Constantly assailed by disbelievers and embraced by fans, he has found it almost impossible to move on with his life.
A lot of people think, oh, you were chosen. I don't like that. And I prefer to think that, you know, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time and I did the wrong thing, getting too close.
For the time being, Walton still doesn't have the answer to the most important question of all.
I don't know where they came from, and I don't know who they were. And all I know is what I experienced. So, you know, to me, they're still a mystery. Thank God. Thank you. How many people have seen the movie? How many people have read the book? Well, a lot fewer, but it's been out of print for a while, so I was supposed to have some for this, but they're going to be coming here in a few days. And, rather than trying to go point by point with where the movie strayed from what really happened, I'll just tell you what happened. It was November 5th, 1975, 34 years ago. It was a Wednesday. There were 7 of us out there. In the movie, they had just 5. This slide's actually a little larger than that, showing all 6 of the other guys. Anyway, we got the crew boss, Mike, Ken Peterson, Dwayne Smith, John Gillette, and the 2 that you can't see there are Alan Dallas and Steve Pierce. And like me, 34 years later, all of these guys stand by their story. You know, what happened, happened. And it was a work day. We just finished a long, hard day cutting trees, and it was starting to get dark, and we all got into this crew cab truck, you know. So that's how 7 of us fit into this truck, 3 in the front, 4 in the back. And we're driving down this rough dirt road out of there, and we saw some lights coming through the trees, just little glimmers at first. Nobody was really particularly alarmed when we first saw it because it was deer hunting season, and you know, occasionally we'll see hunters or campers out. And so, as the closer we got, the stranger it seemed, because it was coming from above where I figured the top of the ridge would be. Little glimmers coming through the trees. This is, you know, a map here of where it happened on the rim. A lot of people don't know that there's quite a bit of forest in Arizona. And so When we finally got around the trees to where we could see it, there was kind of a break, an opening there, and there this thing was, you know. It was just unmistakable. It was, Alan Dallas yelled out, "It's a flying saucer," right off the bat, because, you know, the skeptics were trying to say, oh, they just saw the planet Jupiter off in the sky or something. But there was no mistaking. This was a metallic object hovering in the sky there, less than 100 feet away. But so many times when we've been, you know, in the woods and we'll catch sight of an animal, you know, you say, there goes a bear, there goes a deer, you know. By the time the rest of the guys look, it's almost gone, you know. So that's kind of the impression I had here, that, you know, it was just going to take off. And so I jumped out of the truck and started towards it, thinking it would be gone before I got close. And what I was doing really alarmed the other guys, and they started yelling and screaming at me to get back in the truck. And I pretty quickly started having second thoughts about what I was doing myself, and I slowed down, and I didn't want to look foolish, and so I made myself continue on. We could hear the rumble, the sound that it was making. It was a kind of a mixture of sounds, some very, very high-pitched and some very low rumbles. I think probably off the range of human hearing on both ends of the spectrum. But they were just screaming and yelling at me to get away from there, and you know, that part of the movie was pretty accurate. At one point, you know, I got to where I was looking up at an angle, a pretty steep angle at it. I couldn't really get in much closer because there was a big pile of logging debris there. But I was standing there, and it suddenly started to move. It rose up a little, not real steady. It was kind of an unsteady motion, and the sound got louder, like it was powering up. It was real, you know, you could feel it as well as hear it. And it scared me, so I jumped down behind the end of a log that was sticking out of this pile of debris, and those guys were really frantic, screaming at me to get back in the truck, and you know, I didn't need them to tell me that. I was thinking, how am I going to, you know, get out of here? I felt, you know, a little safer hiding behind the log, but I wanted to get, so I was thinking I would raise up and take off, you know, just make a sprint back to the truck. But when I raised up, I just felt this shock go through my body. It's kind of like an electric shock. Or if you've ever been hit real hard when you didn't see it coming, that's the way it felt, and I just blacked out. But the guys in the truck said that a bolt of energy came out of the bottom of this craft and hit me in the upper body, and it threw me back through the air. I said it just looked like a grenade going off. The force of the blast. One of the guys, Dwayne Smith, he said that, you know, later he became an electrician, and he said he's worked around high voltage. To him, it sounded really electrical, like a lightning bolt or something. But in the police report, the deputy that interviewed Ken Peterson, he said he described it as looking like a long blue flame. But, you know, whether it was a beam or a lightning bolt or whatever, they thought it killed me. They said it threw me back through the air, and my body hit the ground limp, and dust boiled up around me, and they just knew they were next, you know. And so they panicked and left. And those guys have gotten some criticism for fleeing, you know, but I got to say I can't blame them, you know, in the situation that they were in. First of all, they thought I was dead. What good would it do to get themselves killed, you know, if it already killed me? Somebody yelled out it killed him, and everybody was telling the boss, let's go, and I don't think he needed to be told. They drove and almost wrecked the truck getting out of there. But they did what they had to do. It was really the smartest thing to do. They had no weapons, and so they took off, and they went as soon as they got to where they put some good distance between them. They stopped and they got out, and they said they were just all kinds of screaming and yelling, trying to decide what to do. And they started to build a fire, and I guess they didn't actually build a fire, but I think what happened was a deer hunter went by out on the rim road, and so one of the guys suggested they chase them down and see if they could get help, somebody with some guns. And so they tried that, and they weren't able to catch up with them. So finally, Mike and Ken were saying, we've got to go back and see if we can help them. And some of the other guys said, no way, we shouldn't go back there, that's too dangerous. But unlike in the movie where they got out to stand alone in the dark, these guys aren't going to do that, They at least felt safer, being in the truck. They all went back, not just Mike, like in the movie. So I got to hand it to them for having the courage to do that, figuring that the responsible thing to do was to try to rescue me and see if maybe I had survived what happened, and if I needed help, they were going to try to do something. So although I've kind of had some rough times with some of the guys, especially the crew boss, about that, because my family, sort of condemned them for not being more heroic immediately. I got to give them credit that was a very brave thing to do, to go back that night and try to help. They did make a search. They were unable to find me, and so then they went back to town, and they had quite an argument about what to do. I woke up, I was on my back on a hard raised surface, and a light above me. I was in a lot of pain. I was in and out of consciousness for quite a long time, but the pain, led me to think that I'd been hurt and taken to a hospital. And I wasn't thinking real clearly, but I remembered approaching that object and thinking that I must have been hurt somehow, But I was lying on my back, and there was a device laying across my chest. And so I didn't want to move too much. It hurt to move, and I didn't want to interfere with anything the doctors might be doing. But when I finally, my vision cleared a little better, and I saw these creatures standing over me, that was when I knew for sure I was not in the hospital. And I was so weak I could hardly move, but somehow I got the strength, and I guess it was just a jolt of fear at seeing these things and realizing where I was that gave me a burst of energy, and I was able to rise up and knock this thing off of me and back away from them. They came around and came towards me, but I grabbed, there was a bunch of instruments and things along this counter behind me, and I grabbed for something to defend myself with, and there was this long clear glass or plastic. It was either rod or a tube or something like that, but I grabbed it and swung it at him, and then I hit it down on the table, trying to break the end of it off, get something sharp. I wasn't really trying to attack him, I was just trying to keep him away from me, and it must have worked because they stopped all at once before they were in range, and I was, just hysterical, flailing at them, and so all at once they turned and went out into the passage outside the door. This was a very dimly lit and cramped space. It was really very bare, not hardly anything in the way of features. I didn't see any screws, heads, or bolts, or rivets, or welds, or anything like that. In the movie, they have it looking real organic and irregular and lots of debris around, but it wasn't like that very sterile environment. They'd gone to the right, and so I was afraid they'd come back, and I just wanted to get away from them. It wasn't, you know, anything well thought out. It was just sort of a panic move to just put some distance and try to get out of this thing, which might not have been too smart. I mean, had I been able to open the door or something, that might have been worse situation. But I tried. So I went down this little narrow passage, and I kept looking over my shoulder and wondering if they were pursuing me. But because the passage curved so tightly, I couldn't see very far behind me or ahead of me, which really kind of, you know, made me feel, it just added to my panic. And so I just went ahead and scrambled forward, and I even went past one doorway that I might have been able to escape through. But I came to a door, and there was a little room there with a chair in the middle. And when I went in there, I could see that there were points of light on the walls and floor. I don't know if this was a way that they had of viewing the stars, or, you know, where it was actually at the moment, or if it was just like a map or something. But most of the controls that I was trying to operate, I was trying to see if I could open a door, because there was some what looked like doorways on the other side of the room. But most of them didn't seem to do anything. There were some controls that made these lines move on the screen, but nothing opened the door. There was one control that caused the star pattern to move. Not the stars relative to each other, but the whole thing just moved all at once, and that was real disorienting, because, you know, my only reference for standing upright, you know, other than, you know, my sense of balance, was the chair and the door had just come in. So that may have brought someone, or it could have just been a coincidence. But I turned, and there was a man, well, at least I thought he was a man, standing in the doorway. I thought it was somebody there to help me, to rescue me, take me out of there. So I tried to ask him questions. I was telling him about these creatures that I had seen, and but he didn't answer me, and I thought maybe that was because he was wearing a helmet over his head. So when he you know, led me out of there, I went, you know, only too willingly to, you know, if he was going to help me escape. And so when we got outside the craft, at this point it was inside of a large room, either a building, like, sort of a hangar-like thing, or maybe part of a larger craft. And I tried to look around, but he seemed to be in a big hurry. He led me out of this larger room. And it was quite a relief just to be outside, away from those creatures, be in, you know, into the brighter light and cooler air, much more breathable. And so he led me down a hallway to a room, and left me with some other people who were dressed like him, except they weren't wearing helmets. And so I started in with all my questions again, what was going on. Actually, it was just a bunch of babbling and screaming, but I was trying to get them to tell me something, and they weren't answering me. So I started to have a lot of misgivings about whether I was rescued or not, you know. They started leading me over to this table. You know, I'd had enough of laying on tables, you know, but they were trying to get me to lay down on this thing, so I started trying to fight them. And I was still pretty weak from when I regained consciousness, but, you know, my panic gave me a little extra strength, but they were way too strong. They were able to get me up on the table pretty easy, but I got one arm free and reached under the edge of this mask they put over my face and tried to pull it away. But before I could get it off of there, I blacked out. And so the next thing I recalled was waking up. It was cold out. I was on a hard pavement. And there was a light above me, so I looked to see where the light was coming from. And it went off just as I looked. So it was either like a light fixture or a hatch closing or something, but then it was just this shiny metallic thing hovering above the road, and then it just shot straight up into the sky. It was gone from sight so incredibly fast, but it didn't make a sound. It was pretty silent, and I could feel a faint warmth on my face, but other than that, it just sort of moved the tree as it went past. Just the air moving around it a little bit, and especially that suffocation. Now in the movie, they have the actor struggling to breathe with this membrane over his face. Now that didn't happen to me, but you know, I was feeling suffocating. I couldn't breathe, and the air just, it wasn't, I don't know whether the atmosphere wasn't right or had something to do with the injury that from being hit by the beam. It interfered with lung function or something, but you know, when you can't breathe, there's nothing that's going to make you panic more, especially in a real closed-in space like that. So the ones that were called grays, they're called grays now. Back then, this was relatively new. There weren't a whole lot of other similar things, at least none that I knew of. They were short, hairless beings. One thing that differs from what I consider a traditional gray description is the eyes. These eyes were huge, but they were actually, I actually saw them blink. You know, they were like a regular eye, but just very, very large. And but you know, the human type being, they were you know, they were kind of Nordic looking, but there was something very odd about their eyes that I just never have been able to figure out. And you know, as far as the artistic renderings are concerned, that's something I don't feel that I ever got completely correct. But they were very young, healthy looking, very strong looking, and kind of alike in a family sort of way, but not like identical twins. So